Well, welcome back to another episode of the Getting After It podcast, everybody. I'm very excited about tonight's episode. We have the opportunity to hear from Danny Ziem. Am I saying that correct, Danny?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's great. No one usually says that correct. Danny Ziem. That's
I
awesome.
try my best. But it's an honor to have him on the podcast. He's a former firefighter paramedic, and now he joined the Echelon Front team, which I've talked about it before, but that is Jocko's leadership consulting company. He joined there in October of 2021 and currently serves with training people for first responder training due to his experience, and then also with the I don't know what the other one's called. Danny, maybe you can elaborate on that. What is
So
it?
the experiential training program.
That's what it is. I couldn't get the word right. My bad.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, so I started with the company part-time in 2018. We started running the FTX program, which is the field training exercise program. Essentially, the best way to describe it would be, you have the musters, which is like our leadership, 2-day leadership conference events. And then, we have our engagements and stuff, which I do as an instructor. I go out and work with agencies, but we also have the experiential training, which is our hands-on. You can kind of think of it like the lab. So what we do is we do the laws of combat, the mindsets for victory, but we put people in these high stress combat environments. We use these high speed laser systems. And so I help manage and run that program with Cody Gandy. And what we do is we travel around to either corporations or to individual events we hold a few times a year. And we put people on these full-blown military-style capture-kill missions. And then after each mission, we debrief and we're like, hey, where did the laws of combat, where were they successful? Where were they not successful? How does it tie back to your personal life, your job, your relationships? And we're going to get that feedback in real time. And it's kind of one of our high-stress training environments. And the cool thing is like, hey, when you add a little bit of stress, you can't really hide who you are, right? So I've had the privilege when I came on full-time in 21, when I pulled patches and came off the line. I took over that program as a manager underneath the director, Cody, and helped to get that up and running before I promoted to cadre, be a cadre staff on the instructor side.
That's awesome. No, so that's I've heard Jocko talk about that kind of training before, and I think JP's also talked about it a little bit. But
yeah, JP started the program back in early 18. And then passed to Cody as JP promoted, and then I came in underneath Cody. So yeah, JP's pioneer, helped build the whole thing.
Yeah, he's what's the quote? JP activate or something like that. That guy's the man. He's pretty good. But just for my own knowledge, maybe you can explain like how you found Echelon Front, coming from your career as being like a firefighter. Maybe you saw that as an opportunity to take a chance.
Yeah, I had kind of an interesting introduction into the company. So actually, JP and I grew up together. So our moms taught aerobics together back in the 80s. So him and I were literally back in daycare together at like age 4 and age 5. Our moms would take us there. We would fall asleep at like 4:35 in the morning while they taught aerobics classes. So we'd hang out, then they would take us to school. So we kind of grew up. We lost contact for a little bit, and then we ended up back in school together, playing ball together and going to high school and all that. And we've been close ever since. So it's been about 30, 35, 36 years that we've known each other. When we graduated, he went off to the military, and I worked construction for a couple of years and then went into EMS and kind of got into that calling. But long and the short, I already knew about Echelon Front because JP had worked for Jocko on, Task Unit Bruiser when he was on SEAL Team 3. So I had heard the name a bunch. And after they had wrote the book in 2015 and then started up the FTX program, JP was like, hey, you need to come out, check out what we're doing. And initially he was like, hey, we need a standby medic for these hands-on trainings in case someone gets legit hurt. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to come out. Mm-hmm. And then when I saw the impact of the program and I saw people just completely turning over, I was sold. And interestingly enough, I started my career on the West Coast as an EMT and a medic. I ended up lateraling to Texas and then lateraling here. But the last agency that I lateraled to here issued me the book Extreme Ownership. And I was obviously already familiar because I already was tied in a little bit with the company and starting my employment with them part-time. And And then a few years later, the opportunity came. They asked me to like, hey, when you want to come on, help build a first responder program and help manage some of these programs. And that's why I took the leap in 21 when they offered me a full-time spot.
That's awesome. And I think that's a big thing that I try to preach, at least, is like when you see opportunities like that, you know, even if you don't feel qualified, I'm not saying like you had these feelings, but
Oh yeah, no, I did.
yeah.
I do currently.
Yeah. I mean, I think lots of people do. I do with this podcast, to be honest. Like, I feel like, you know, who am I? I'm 25 years old to tell people, hey, you should go try things that you're interested in
Yeah.
trying. But I think there's something to that.
Yeah,
You know,
you're right. I mean, you see an opportunity, you attack it.
right.
That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So how would you say your experience with being it wasn't an EMT, it was a firefighter paramedic, correct?
Yeah, I started as so kind of progression of education. You start as like an EMT basic. Some states have EMT intermediates or advanced, and then the highest level you can be is a paramedic. So I started as an EMT, loved it. It was honestly, I've been a terrible student my entire life. Barely made it through high school, right? Like if I wasn't good at sports, I probably wouldn't have made it. But when I went to EMT school, it just clicked. I loved it because I was finally interested. So I knew immediately, like, hey, I want to pursue this medical path a little further. Went to paramedic school, then went through a fire academy and ended up being firefighter, paramedic, and then some other things, some other special ops groups and stuff. So
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think attracted you to that job specifically?
the first thing that opened my eyes was 9/11. I
Hmm.
remember 9/11. I was in school. I was about 17, just about 18 years old when it happened. And I'd be a liar if I told you that 9/11 happened and I immediately was like, I want to be a fireman. That wasn't my initial thought, but I knew I wanted to do something. It had a tugging on me. It had something in me that, like, when I saw the images and I saw the pictures of the cops and the firemen, um, and just the devastation and the depleted looks on their faces after putting in so much work and all these things, it tugged on me a little bit. And honestly, I didn't act on it right away. I got out of high school. Like I said, I really wasn't all that motivated. I started doing some construction stuff and then got laid off one winter, and which was pretty standard. And then my brother, my oldest brother Mike, I'm the youngest of five, but my oldest brother Mike was a combat corpsman. He was in the Navy, but he was stationed with Fleet Marines. And when he got out, he became an EMT and then a paramedic. My original plan, I'll have to deny this actually somehow, it was to be a cop. I wanted to be a police officer, but 18, 19-year-old me made some decisions that put that plan on hold for a while.
We all do, right?
Yeah, right. So but yeah, so he was my first exposure to like the EMS, the emergency medical side. And I was like, man, I think I want to do what my brother's doing, it because it always interests me. And then, like I said, I went to school in like 05 or 06, 05, 06,
Yeah.
and just fell in love with it. And then during that process, going through EMT, then going through paramedic, I went through my paramedic program with Sacramento City Fire Department, and doing my internships and working in the 911 system, and watching these guys jump off of Big Red, as we call it, and getting to do the medicine side, but also like getting to fight fire and break stuff and do all kinds of cool things. I was like, man, I can do both. And then that was kind of my first exposure to like, hey, I want to take this leap. But I would say in general, yeah, 9/11 kind of put the calling on my heart. And I knew I wanted to serve the public in some way, shape, or form. I didn't know what it would look like yet. But I'm happy the path that I ended up on.
Yeah, and I appreciate you going into some context about that. And it's weird. Like, I don't really have an experience with 9/11 because I'm the generation that was 3 years old when it happened. And you don't hear that much from people of like, hey, this was my experience with it. So I appreciate you going into some context about that. And I've heard Dakota Meyer talk a little bit about 9/11. Are you familiar with Dakota?
Yeah, yeah.
But we used to work together, and he has this quote. I think it's him. I really hope it is him. But he says, he hates 9/11. He hates what happened on that day. He'd give anything for a 9/12,
Yeah,
just because of that,
yeah.
like that unity, that everyone came together and was it was like America again. Like, we were all here to support each other and help.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny. Like, I remember right after that going back to school, and and this is a small thing, but it's burned into my mind because I did it myself too. I remember pulling in, and I was a senior, and I remember pulling in, and I had taped an American flag just on. I had a little S10 Blazer, and I had taped an American flag at like half mast, like on my car antenna.
Yeah.
And I remember pulling into the high school parking lot and just seeing like every car had the same thing, and everyone was flying American flags, and nothing else really mattered. So I would agree, and I think that was Dakota that said that. I'm not totally sure, but man, 9/11 was a terrible thing, but we've never seen unity in current times like 9/12.
Right.
And obviously, the environment that we're in now is nowhere near 9/12. So yeah, that's a rough thing to have to swallow.
Yeah. I was just about to say, like, right now, I don't see that ever happening in the country right now, which is a sad statement, but I'm sure it can. It's
Hey,
just,
you know what? Through leadership, we
that's
can do
right.
it. We can do it through leadership and ownership and trying to change the things. And that's our primary goal. That's my primary goal. And what I do now, working with responders and police and fire and EMS, is to push that message. So,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that message. And it's one that really helps this podcast is discipline and leadership and making sure that you are doing all you can to help, control the environment might be the wrong phrase, but to help dictate the situation or be the person that people can support, like lean on for support when they need it. But yeah, I think I'd like to kind of go back to your like paramedic career and being a firefighter paramedic.
sure.
From what like I've read about that job and what is like what you have to do, it's a very high stress job, it seems like.
It can be, it's funny, like people. So total, I did, I think, just over 17 years, and I might go back and do some reserve stuff too, to be honest with you, because I do desperately miss some aspects of it. I think I still got some service left in me that I can do while still serving here at Echelon Front. But yeah, I mean, it's a give and take, man. It's people say all the time, like, hey, thank you for your service, thank you for being a fireman, thank you for being a paramedic, and I'm like, I mean, honestly, it's like the best job in the world, like. The camaraderie and the brotherhood and the stuff that I got to experience was amazing. And I can't believe I got paid to do a lot of the things that I got to do. And there is a trade-off. I'd be a liar if I told you otherwise. There's some things I will carry with me my entire life, right? That I will never forget. And there's definitely some stressors, and there's definitely some scars and some things that I have to deal with. But that's like 10% of the job, if we're being honest. And then there's guys and gals out there that'll be like, yeah, you're right, it's the most stressful job and we want all the recognition in the world. And don't get me wrong, like it has its moments, but 10% of the time it can be the hardest thing you'll ever have to deal with or do. But 90% of the time, man, it's pretty legit. I was getting paid to do some pretty awesome things.
Yeah. What's if you don't mind me asking, what's like one thing that you miss about it besides like the brotherhood and the camaraderie and those kind of things?
This might come across wrong, and I don't mean it to come across this way, but because at Echelon Front, I truly believe that I am able to make an even larger impact than I could as an individual working as a first responder, working as a firefighter, a paramedic, or SWAT medic, or whatever. But I do have moments where I feel like I'm lacking the ability to make an impact. And I know that's not true, but there's something about putting on a uniform and being squared away and checking out your gear and prepping your mind and your body and your spirit for to serve other people that I miss.
Yeah.
And my wife reminds me pretty consistently. She's like, "Well, hey, what about all the other bad stuff that you used to come home and complain about?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, well, I'm glorifying it right now, right? Like, just let me have my moment." But I would say, hands down, the best part, other than knowing that you can make a difference in someone's worst moment, is the camaraderie and the brotherhood, and the pranks, the firehouse pranks. That's a real thing.
Yeah,
that's a real thing.
Let's hear one if you got an example of like either one that you did or one that got happened to you.
So there's a lot of them that are not appropriate to tell. So let me filter here. There was one of them actually just recently. my buddy Rub, his name's Ruben, and he won't mind me hopefully saying his name, but Ruben, if you see this, I love you, brother. Um, I just sent him. It's like there was a meme. There's a page called Firehouse Chronicles. They're the guys that own Firehouse Coffee as well, I believe. Anyway, so they just put something out, and it was very similar to one of the pranks that I had played. My crew had played on my buddy Ruben, and Ruben was a he's pretty like affected by like gets spooked out by like ghosts and goblins and that type of stuff, right? We had like set the tone for this whole shift, like kind of like at dinner just talking about spooky stuff and all these types of things. And he's getting a little bit creeped out and like finding a way to like make the soda can move on the table. I'm like, oh, what was that? Like just all stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then what we did was I hit a Bluetooth speaker. I went into his bunk up into the ceiling and hit a Bluetooth speaker above his bed. And then at night when we all started to kind of rack out, when it slowed down, we started playing some creepy, like this little girl like laughing, like saying like, I see you, and like giggling. But he was sitting in bed. Yeah, he was sitting in bed and he had earphones on. So we kept turning it up a little bit louder and louder. And the way the rooms were is like you had like 3 to 4 guys in a bunk, but they were separated by like these big lockers, 3 lockers for Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie shifts. And then we were like listening and watching, there's a couple guys in the room, a couple guys in the next room. Anyway, we kept doing it till he kept getting spooked and he came like running out of the room, all freaked out. And all of us like jumped back in bed. We're like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, we don't hear anything. And this went on for like an hour and a half. And he probably didn't sleep for like 3 weeks. And then finally, he ended up figuring it out and hating all of us. But I sent him the video that Firehouse Chronicles or Fire Department Chronicles recently did, which was a similar prank. I was like, hey buddy, you remember this? He just sent me back some expletives. But
there you go. Hey, that's how I know you guys are friends.
Oh yeah.
I'll do you a solid on after this this quick call here, but my dad kind of did the same thing to me. Have you ever heard of the Eviltron? Do you know what that is?
No.
So it's this little device. It's about the size of a quarter and it's magnetic. But it's a little speaker and it has like 5 preset sounds on it. And one of them is a little girl like giggling. One of them's like a door opening. I think there's like scratching on a door, like those kind of things. But the first time he got it, he put it underneath my bed, like on the metal frame. And so I'm sitting in my bed, just like asleep or trying to go to sleep. And all of a sudden I just hear this guy go, hey, can you hear me? And that's like one of the sounds is, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
And it happened twice. And I was like, okay, this is freaking. So I run up to my dad's room. I'm like, Dad, there's someone in my room. Like, I don't know what to say. There's someone in my room. He comes down. There's like no one in there. And it happened again. And I was like, okay, there's something here. But anyways, it's a fun little thing. I'll send it to you.
Oh, man. To this day, I'll send Ruben some of that stuff. He's just like, I hate you.
You're the worst. You scarred me for life.
I mean, yeah, and there's so many stories like that. Again, there's a lot of them that's like for HR reasons I won't share.
Yeah,
but it's just that's a real thing. Like that that aspect of the fire service that's a real thing. So when you see like movies and stuff where it's just constant pranks in the firehouse, like that's real.
Yeah,
and man, I miss that a lot. In fact, I just posted a thing on my Instagram today that I reposted from like Fit to Fight Fire. That's like something to the effect of, like there's a fine line, like being entertaining or funny in the firehouse. You have to be just funny enough to entertain your crew, but like not so funny that you get sent to HR. That's a real thing.
Hey, that's you got to balance it. There's balance in everything. So
yeah, exactly.
That brings up like an interesting thought for me, at least, is do you think like those pranks and doing those things together as like a team kind of helps manage some of the high stress situations that you do find yourself in that job?
Yeah, undoubtedly. There's definitely a stigma with humor in the police, fire, and EMS world, because if I'm being honest, there's a lot of things that we laugh about, or there's a lot of things that we'll crack jokes on that if your average American heard, they'd be like, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah.
But the reality is those pranks and that dark humor and the stuff that we talk about and joke about, they're coping mechanisms, right? I mean, we have to be able to detach to a certain point, and we have to kind of snap out of that emotional sense. And that, we talk about that at Echelon Front, just making good decisions too, right? Making good leadership decisions. but you have to be able to detach. You have to be able to laugh, because otherwise the career will eat you alive.
Yeah.
And anyone that gets into the career of a firefighter or paramedic or EMT or police officer, and definitely when you start getting into some of the special operations groups and stuff, man, you have to be able to laugh at some of those things. You have to have thick skin. You gotta let stuff roll off your shoulders. And that camaraderie and the messing with each other and coming to work and having that aspect of knowing that these guys, and gals, I happen to work with all dudes, but that they understand me, they get it. It does take some of that pressure and that stress off. It's
Yeah.
definitely a necessity.
Yeah, I think so too. I went through some like health challenges not too long ago. And I was in a dark situation, but I would always try and joke about it. Like I'm
Yeah.
6'3". At like the worst, I think I got down to like 135 pounds. And
Oh, wow.
I'd tell everyone like, oh yeah, I'm just a toothpick, like whatever. But I'd always like try and make jokes about it and like help the situation get a
Yeah.
little bit
Try to be
lighter.
lighthearted.
Cause yeah, I found like, when you focus on the negative, then that's all you see. And then your life becomes really dark and dreary. And I want to go back to one thing that you said actually about like developing thick skin, because one of the points of this podcast is to help like my generation and the future generation like develop practical skills that will help them throughout their entire life. And developing thick skin is one that I don't think my generation's very good at, to be honest, or the people coming up are not. And I don't know if that's because of social media or, I don't want to say people are soft, but like they're not challenging themselves or what that might be. But in terms of developing thick skin, do you have any advice or tips on how you would go about doing that?
You know, I think one of the biggest things about like developing thick skin, or um and by that I mean basically just resiliency in
Yeah.
general, right? Is you have to be okay with failing. You have to be okay with not letting the situation dictate your response. And the biggest thing to realize is that when you're feeling a certain way, when you have an opportunity to respond to something, it's a choice. Influence is a choice. And you could either choose to allow that situation, that emotion, that person, that comment, that belief structure, whatever it is, right? Whatever's being thrown at you that makes you feel something, it's a choice. Allowing something to influence you is a choice. And we talk a lot about influence at Echelon Front because influence, we believe, is the true core of leadership, right? But influence goes both ways. Like, I have to build trust for someone to allow me to influence them, but influence is a choice. So I can either allow my environment, I can allow my feelings, my emotions, the things people think, feel, and say to me. I can allow those things to dictate my response, but that's a weakness, right? So I think just exposing yourself to hard things, exposing yourself to environments where people don't think like you, people may feel a different way, exposing yourself to areas where you're most likely going to fail, and just incurring those things. And over time, once you realize that, hey, I can't dictate my response to this situation, I am in control of how I respond here, then it becomes more intuitive for you to just be like, hey, I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm not going to let this throw me off track. I'm going to continue to push forward at whatever effort or whatever thing you're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
And once you kind of switch your mindset to realize that it truly is true influence truly is a choice, then developing that thick skin or that resiliency to be able to push forward without letting someone or something knock you off track, it's really no factor at that point.
Yeah. And I love that. I love the no factor aspect of it. It's really how you react. I listen to, I'm sure you know who David Goggins is, but I listen to him, talk a little bit about that. Like, people will have their opinions, and if you're just like, thinking about developing thick skin in terms of like, not necessarily listening to everyone's opinion or just living your life as you want to, he's like, everyone's going to judge you, and it's just how you respond. Are you going to think about it all the time, or are you just going to try and challenge yourself and go after what you want to do? But
and one thing on the is people are going to judge you, and people are going to say things, and people are going to say things that make you feel a certain way or whatever. Here's the reality. If it's making you feel a certain way, sometimes you have to evaluate that thing and say, hey, is there any validity to what they're saying? Where is my place in ownership here? What am I doing? Why do I feel this way? Why did they say that? What position of ownership do I have here? Right? Because a lot of times, like when stuff upsets me or stuff makes me feel a certain way or stuff makes me feel like I want to respond, I'm like, hey, why is this actually penetrating my skin? Why is this penetrating my shield that I have around me? Oh, shoot, it's because it's true and this person's right. And that's something I got to deal with. Right. So there's some validity there too, right? Sometimes it takes some soul searching, because if it bothers you, chances are it's probably true.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect of humility that I think plays into that.
Oh yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, you have to be humble. Jocko talks about that too. And I'm sure he tells all the instructors at Echelon Front that like humility is a huge thing. Like you have to be willing to learn and accept, like you said, failure as an option if there's something that you want to do. And if you're just going off your ego, it's really hard to do that in my experience. But yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I might get this wrong, but you brought up something similar to that, like a similar topic in there's an online training with Rob Jones that you did about going from buddy to boss.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's a difficult situation for a lot of people in terms of like, well, hey, now my friend, I have to kind of tell him what to do or sometimes. But yeah, like as you progress in your career and you try these new things, most likely you will start to, level up if you're being consistent, if you're showing discipline, if you're trying to be a leader on your team or whatever that might be. But do you have any advice for like going from buddy to boss that might be just like a quick thought of, yeah, I guess, yeah, I'll just ask that question. Do you have any advice from going from buddy to boss in an organization?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is consistency. A lot of the times what causes a problem from buddy to boss is you have these relationships, right? And we talk about this a lot at Echelon Front, that relationships are paramount. Relationships are paramount in all aspects of leadership. But you have these relationships, then you get into this position, and then you start to treat the people that are close to you or the people that you have something established with a little bit differently than you treat other people. And it's not that you don't value the other people, it's that you feel an obligation to these people. So the minute you throw inconsistency or consistency out the window and you become inconsistent, that's an uphill battle. And the reality is, if your relationship is where it should be, if you do have the trust and influence over these people, then they're going to want to do the right things, not because you now have that position of authority, but because you have the respect, the trust, and the influence, because you've spent the time building the relationship. The key is you have to start building those relationships. You have to be consistent and do the right things before that transition happens, right? Because so often we want to do everything we want to do, and then the transition happens, and now it's like, oh, now I have to be this whole new person. And that's one of the things I talked about on that segment was, hey, look, I remember yesterday. So you can't come in here and start acting a certain way when just yesterday you and me were being complete jackwagons and you weren't acting this way and you didn't care and you were saying the wrong things and had the wrong attitude. Now 24 hours later, because you're promoted, you're trying to be different. The key is consistency and living these things, because you have to be honest with it. And if we don't teach it and preach it and live it, then like, why are we doing it?
Yeah, that's like that was my favorite part of the video that you had. It was, you talked about that, like people remember things. And so if you wrong someone in the past, and just to like, try and level up and get to that point, and then you get to the position where you're trying to influence them and lead them on a team, most likely they're not going to listen to you unless like they have to because you're their manager. But either way, that relationship will not be good. And ultimately, like, you won't have any leadership capital over that person, really.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. It becomes a punitive relationship. And you're like, well, I'm just doing what you're telling me to do because you're my boss or because you can take punitive measures. But it's like, that's not why you want people doing things for you. That's not why you want them to be a part of the team. You want them to be a part of the team because they genuinely respect you. They genuinely know that you care about them, that you are placing their priority over you, right?
Yeah.
Any good leadership, any good leader should prioritize their people over themselves. They should prioritize the mission first, the team second, the individuals on that team third, and then themselves. That's what it comes down.
I love that. There's a book out there. I think it's called Leaders Eat First or Leaders Eat Last, or something like that, where it talks about that entire concept of like, take care of the team and get done what you have to get done last. Like it all compounds. And it's like you said, one of my favorite quotes is consistency compounds. just because it's simple. It's like, it's a simple message. It's true. And yeah. But I do want to go back, if you don't mind, to the topic of bosses. And since you
Sure.
do work at Echelon Front, I know like you probably have some work with Jocko, but um, I found Jocko when I was like early college. It was 2017. I started following him, and that's when I really started applying some of the lessons and principles that he taught of like discipline. Discipline equals freedom. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but there's something to it. Like when you stay disciplined, things are easier. If you have a hard time like with drinking alcohol, like maybe you binge or something like that, then if you stay disciplined and you don't touch that, then your life's going to be easier. And you're free from that like addiction. But he really instilled in me, I would say, that focus on discipline and the importance of discipline in every aspect of your life. Um, but that's one lesson and principle that he's taught me that I've applied and it's worked. That's the funny thing, is like everyone's like, hey, how are you disciplined? It's like I just do it. Like
Yeah.
it's hard sometimes, but it really does change your life. And um, I want to shift the focus to you for a second, if that's okay. Is there a lesson from Jocko or someone on his team that you've learned that's kind of shaped your life to where you're at now, or anything on in that realm?
Working for Jocko and for Leif Babin is, first of all, I'll tell you, it's a humbling experience. Uh, Working with the caliber of people that I work with Jocko and Leif and the entire cadre and everybody at Echelon Front, whether it's operations teams or support teams or whatever, it's a humbling experience. And I can't tell you how many times, honestly, that I've been sitting around a table, either in a meeting or at a dinner or at a debrief, whatever it is, and I've just kind of scanned the room and looked around the table and thought, like, man, I don't belong here. Like, I cannot believe I have a seat at this table. And the most important thing, and you just mentioned it a second ago, that Jocko and Leif impress on us all the time, and we teach and preach this when we go out and talk to people too, is that, man, you have to remain humble. You have to remain humble. And there's been some people that have come into Echelon Front and they are high caliber individuals. I mean, you name it, they've done it, type guys. And they ended up not working out with Echelon Front just simply because of humility factor.
Hmm.
And it's that's be the most important thing I've taken away from being able to rub elbows with the type of men and women that I get to serve next to at Echelon Front, is that humility is number one. Humility is number one. And without humility, nothing else can happen. No growth can happen. No impact can happen. Nothing without coming from a stance and a place of humility. And they impress that upon us all the time. They are very straightforward when they tell us, like, hey, just know that, like, we expect it here at the company. We expect it here amongst our team level, amongst our individual, but also people are watching you, right? People are watching you. And every time I step out the door, every time I'm wearing an Echelon Front something, every time I'm teaching or talking to an individual, like, I have to remind myself that I represent Jocko. I represent Leif Babin. I represent Jamie Cochran, our COO. I represent Dave Burke and JP Donnell and the rest of the people that have paved this pathway for me. And it's only through humility can I continue to honor the company and do the right thing by them. I would say that's the most important lesson I've taken away from the people that I get to work with.
Yeah, I agree. Humility it's a key factor, I think, in just progress in general. I think the reason being is because like it forces you, not forces, that's the wrong word, but it allows you to be coached, and it allows you to listen and actually like apply those principles. But I like what you said, just because, you're part of Echelon Front, in my eyes, like Echelon Front's it's the leadership, like the pinnacle of leadership, because I've applied what Jocko's done to my life, and it's worked for me. So I like what you said about, like, they worked hard to create where we're at now, and I respect that. And because of that, I'm going to, not think highly of myself over other people or anything like that. That that's what's interesting about Jocko, that I actually went to muster 11. And
Oh, cool.
when I went there, I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit worried because people say like, don't meet your heroes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I meet Jocko and he is someone who's a little bit arrogant and he's putting on like a facade for social media, then
Yeah.
I'm gonna really be beaten down. But when I met him, he was down to earth and, super nice. He listened to and this is like when I was sick.
Yeah.
He like listened to my story. He just sat there for a little bit. It was in between a lunch break, and just that in general, like he is what he preaches, and it
Yeah.
for me
100%.
comes down to humility and leadership, like you said.
Yeah. There's, like I said, I kind of had an interesting introduction into the company just because of relationships that I had, right? But I remember the first time when I met Jocko and Leif, it was at Muster in San Francisco. That might have been, I don't know if that was 10 or 11,
Okay.
but
Well,
what city were you in at 11?
11 was in Phoenix.
Okay, I think I was at that one. So this was prior to that. But either way, and I remember meeting them, and I'd heard all the stories, and I had read the book, and I'd listened to the podcast, and I'd done all these things, and obviously I had heard the names from JP for years, right, since 2006.
Yeah.
And I have to say, now or then and now, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin and Dave Burke, and JP's a little different because I've known him for so long, so I never really had that feeling. But when people meet him too, it's like the whole team is so down to earth. The whole team truly believes and lives the things that we teach, and that's a very refreshing thing to see and be a part of. Because as you experience, I mean, you walk up to Jocko, people walk up to Jocko all the time. They're like, "Hey, Jocko, how you doing?" He will stop. He will shake their hand. He will listen. He pays attention. Same with Leif. Leif's probably one of the most open, caring, just down to earth individuals I've ever met. Both of them are. But Leif's like, I remember before I even worked for the company, all Leif knew about me was that like, hey, I was one of JP's buddies. And the first time I ever met him, he was like, "Oh, hey, man," like shook my hand, gave me a hug. "So great to meet you." And I was like, whoa, like I did not expect these guys to be so friendly. Um, and then as I've gotten to know them more, now there's definitely a chain of command. There's definitely a separation just out of respect and decentralized command, right? That we teach and preach. But we have, every other week we have cadre meetings and then all hands meetings, and they're all on the meetings, and we're spread all over the country, right? So it's rare that we're all actually in the same room. But they are exactly what they portray. They're exactly what they portray. And it's funny, we had an all hands meeting or a cadre meeting recently, and one of the things that Jocko said, this is definitely not a Jocko quote that you're going to see anywhere. But this just goes to show you how down to earth like him and Leif both are. We were having this meeting and we were talking about making impact and being humble and understanding that, hey, we are, in the public eye, and we are a leadership company, and what we want to do is pass our message and make impact, right? And basically he was pushing on us that, look, you're being watched, you're being judged, do the right thing. And then he kind of gave his monologue, right? You know how he has this great way of speaking, him and Leif both. And at the very end, he was like, "Hey, look, man, just be cool, dude. Just be cool. Just be nice to people. Just be cool." And it was like, that just stuck with me. That's like the simplest quote you'll ever hear come out of his mouth, right? But he's like, "Hey, man, just be cool, dude. Just be cool." And that kind of became a joke amongst our team for a couple of weeks. Like every time something will happen, we'll be like, "Hey, man, just be cool. Just be cool, dude."
Yeah.
That really is how it is. That's really how they are. And that's refreshing to be able to work in that environment, because
Yeah.
you're right. I've been pretty bummed out if I got into the company and I'm like, "Oh, they're nothing like they portray," because that I wouldn't want to be a part of something like that either.
I know. I'm telling you, it was like one of my biggest fears. It's like I'm excited to go to this muster, but I really hope it is what it say. But I agree, and I think, in my opinion, like the reason being that like people are attracted to that is because it's truth, and like
Yeah.
when you apply the principles that they say and it works for you, you'll notice like, hey, it is truth. It's like leadership capital is a real thing. Discipline equals freedom. Like that is true. Yeah, I've read a lot from Leif in terms like in his book, and then I follow him on social too, and he seems exactly the same. I didn't have the opportunity to meet him at the muster, but Yeah, there's some great leaders in that organization, and so much to
100%.
learn from. Um, but if you don't mind, like kind of going back to your experience as a firefighter paramedic, are there specific lessons from your career, your 16-year career as a firefighter paramedic, that transitioned pretty easily to being a leadership instructor for Echelon Front? Anything like that that you can think of top of mind?
That transit, I wouldn't say that there's anything from my career that transitioned into the instructor space that would make me like a better instructor per se, or
Yeah.
a better part of Echelon Front. I think it gave me a lot of good life experience, as far as honestly some very poor leadership that I've seen, and some great leadership that was even before like this curriculum had come out. But when I look back at my career now, and in the few years that I was integrated doing both, when I was working for Echelon Front and working in the fire service, I would say that implementing these principles and seeing them implemented in the environments within these small teams, within these high stress type careers, um, were just massively successful. And when I was working on SWAT as a TAC med for a few years, with the same city, but on the PD side. And we rolled out extreme ownership. And I was kind of hesitant, to be honest with you. I was like, there's some salty dogs on this team. Like all the dudes I worked with, there was 26 guys on the team, 20 law operators, and then 6, maybe 8, I can't remember, but TAC med operators that were either firefighter medics or medics on the ambulance and whatnot. And myself, and a sergeant and a couple other guys were on the leadership corps, and we rolled this out to just our team as a pilot program. And what I started to realize was being able to pull from experience of high stress environments, being able to pull from experience of working with bad leaders, good leaders, experience where I was a poor leader, in different, whether it's field training officer positions or preceptor, meaning I would take the brand new medics coming out of school, and they have to ride with me for X amount of time to make sure they're not going to kill anybody before we release them and stuff. And when I think about the laws of combat, when I think about cover and move and simple and prioritize and execute and decentralized command, it's just mind blowing to me how I never recognized these things on my own 15 years ago. Right. Because they're so simple, no pun intended. They're so simple, and they're so relevant, and they're so universal, that when I think back and when I go out and I teach law enforcement or fire or EMS, or, white collar companies that I work with now too, it's so easy for me to pull out of my experience of failures and successes, working as a firefighter paramedic, working in high stress environments, and seeing how those things implement into things like mass casualty incidents, and things of that, where it's like, you have to implement these types of things to be successful. But I don't know that I could pick out one thing that's like, hey, this in my career has made me a better instructor. I think the mass amounts of failures that I've done throughout my career, the mass amounts of looking back at my poor responses to situations, my poor responses to subordinates and superiors, has helped me to draw from those experiences and to be more effective as an instructor. But I'd say overall, just the experience of being immersed in it is extremely helpful. I don't know if that answers your question or not. It was kind of a long-winded one, but
yeah, no, I think it does. And there's a couple of things that I think are relevant about what you just said. Like one, I agree. Like failure to me is the best teacher, and it's the worst teacher, and I hate it. Like I hate going through every time I fail. But to that point, you were humble enough to not like get angry or like harp on those, because that's one thing I think. Unfortunately, my generation, like I've struggled with this in the past. Like I fail, and all I think about is that failure, and I don't learn from it. And it's like that's where humility comes into play. And it's like you have to humble yourself at times and realize, you know what, I was wrong. And extreme ownership comes in here at this time and says, let's take ownership of that. It was on me. It's all on me. And I love that message that Jocko talks about. Is like it's on you. Like no one else is
100%.
responsible. Your reaction, that's on you. The way you respond, it's all on you. So yeah, I don't think there's like a right or wrong answer to that. But for for me, it sounds like humility is like a big principle. It literally follows you everywhere you go.
Look, yeah, I if I had to pick out one thing, like I said earlier, humility, you can either be humble or be humbled.
Yeah.
And I have been humbled a few times in my life and in my career, and it's something that I do everything in my power to avoid at this point. So I constantly try to look for things where I'm like, and of course this comes down to ownership. This like, what part do I take in this, and how can I better this, and how can I make sure I'm serving better and doing better and not coming across pompous or arrogant or cocky or any of these types of things. Because I'll be honest with you, it's easy to get wrapped up in pride. It's easy to get wrapped up in positions of authority, and working in the American Fire Service, man, especially post 9/11 fire service. It's like that becomes a status thing at times. People want the recognition, and you get the recognition. I'll be honest with you. And it's easy to fall into that like holier than thou, mightier than thou, and lose that humility. And when you lose that humility, the next thing that steps in and fills that gap is complacency. And when you lose humility and that gets backfilled with complacency, it's a dangerous place to be living in. And not only just for us in the field, an actual dangerous place to be complacent, because it will kill you or kill your brothers and sisters. But man, it'll kill in other ways. It kills relationships. It kills opportunities. It kills the impact that you have the opportunity to make. So without humility, that creeps in. And so it's a fine line. We call it the disease of victory. When you start to have all this success and, it causes you to lose humility, you start to get prideful, then you get complacent, and then it's just a downhill spiral from there.
Yeah, it's a dangerous path to be on for sure. One question that kind of came to my head while you were talking about that is humility is, I agree, it's crucial to have. But in a leadership role, how do you balance like imposter syndrome with like still being humble enough to like listen to feedback and things like that? Because I'll be honest, like, I'm like a team lead on in the organization that I work at, and because of that, like sometimes I feel like I am an imposter. Like I don't know if you're familiar with imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
But like sometimes it just feels weird, and like it's important to be humble, but there's also a time when you have to tell people, this is kind of expectations, those kind of things. But are there any lessons that you have like come across, or any principles that you use to overcome imposter syndrome but still maintain credibility as like a leader?
You want to talk about imposter syndrome? Go back to what I talked about, sitting around those dinner tables, right? Like this is something that I still deal with. This is still something, like I'm telling you, when I sit around these tables, I mean, imagine I'm sitting across the table from Jocko Willink, Leif Babin, Dave Burke, JP Donnell, like these titans that I get to work with, right? Yeah. Every single one of them. Cody Gandy, Rob Jones. It's just, Carlos Mendez. I don't know if you follow all those other instructors, but all titans in their own ways.
I'm trying to get Rob on this podcast.
Oh, dude, he's a great dude. I'll put in a word for you.
You're the man.
Him and I bantered back and forth. It's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
I love Rob. He's a great dude. But it's like, so, I sit at this table and I feel imposter syndrome all the time. And constantly JP and those guys are coming back at me, because I'll be honest with them. I'm like, man, I just don't feel like I belong there. Like, dude, you've got X amount of service. You've done this. You were on these ops groups. You've done. I'm like, I get it. I'm not saying that like I'm not happy with my career path, but imposter syndrome is a real thing. And there's a whole section, actually, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Leadership strategies and tactics. There it is.
That talks about imposter syndrome. And one of the things it says is that like, it's okay depending upon how you respond to it and how you acknowledge it, right? Because if you respond to it from a place of humility, that's fine. But if you get so deep into like an imposter syndrome where you're no longer effective, then that's where it becomes a problem. And I think the biggest way for me to get past the imposter syndrome, to make it feel like I'm earning my spot at the table, is to execute at the highest level I possibly can, right? As I want to execute to the best of my abilities. I want to stay above reproach at all times. And I want to be the person that when Jocko or Leif or Jamie or Dave or JP or one of the instructors comes to me and is like, hey, we need to execute on this, I'm like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And I'm going to execute 100%. Because I do feel like I'm earning my spot every day. And that's a real thing too. You should always feel like you're earning your spot every day. And that, to me, is not part of being an imposter syndrome. To me, that's being a good team member. That's respecting the people that you work with, respecting the level of the position you have, whatever it is, whether it's at the bottom, at the top. And you should try to earn your spot every day, and you should try to execute every day. And the way to get yourself out of that imposter syndrome is to consistently execute, because there will come a point where there's going to be people that come beneath you. They're going to see what you're doing. They're going to see your level of execution, and they're going to feel like they have imposter syndrome. And that's when it's your job to remain humble and then become a mentor. So ultimately, you got to look at it as a long-term goal, a strategic goal. You can feel like you have imposter syndrome sometimes. That's fine. I feel like it all the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it maintains a certain level of that humility.
Yeah.
But the best way to fight it is to execute, in my humble opinion.
I would agree. It's like I'm in a sales career, and we always say like, hey, numbers don't lie. And I think that the principle applies to this as well. Is like, if you execute and you show up every day and you're consistent, and like I said, consistency compounds, and you're going to just continue to excel. And it's interesting you brought up mentorship, because I released a podcast yesterday about that. One thing I talked about is giving back. Like, when you're at a point when people are asking you questions and looking to you as an example, then it's important to give back, because you had people help you get to where you're at, and it's important. And I think doing that also helps you remain humble. Because you're like, hey, I was in their shoes at one point, and it takes a while to get to where
somebody somewhere along the line of wherever you're at. I mean, maybe it's not a mom or a dad or a brother or sister, but somebody somewhere, for everybody, sacrificed something to help you get to where you're at.
Yeah.
To some level, right? Even those that are the bootstrappers, they're like, I did this all on my own. There was somebody somewhere that helped you along the way. And the most important thing you could do is remember that. And when you have an opportunity, and when you get to a place where you're like, hey, I can make a difference, and I can be a mentor, and I can bring these people along with me. Because look, man, when, Jocko said this recently, and this really stuck too. It's like, hey, when you care more about your team winning than yourself winning, that's when you're truly getting to the pinnacle of leadership. Mm-hmm. And part of that is knowing that I want to bring people along with me to victory. Not only that, I want to push them out ahead of me. It's like you see those marathon runners and stuff that it's like they'll actually help their teammate and push their teammate across the finish line before them, right? That is like that's the epitome of leadership, when you care about others being more successful than yourself. Because ultimately, when I said earlier, I talked about, and this is how, when I talk to clients, I talk to them about cover and move. Cover and move at its purest form, obviously, is a gunfighting tactic, right? Yeah. But when we talk about cover and move, we want you to really take away that like relationships are paramount. And true cover and move, well, the way I explain it is prioritizing other people. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's like, if you could always have the thought process that if the mission's first, if the mission's successful, then who's also successful? Me. And if my team is successful, who's also successful? Me. If my individuals on my team, if I'm pushing them to success and I'm pushing them across that finish line before me, who's also successful? Me. So if I can prioritize other people, if I can mentor other people, if I can be an asset for other people and not an obstacle for other people, then that's true leadership and true mentorship. And then you get the relationships, the trust, the influence. And you don't do it for selfish measures. You do it because you want to see other people be successful. That's true leadership. And when Jocko said that, when you care more about other people winning and more about the team winning than yourself, that's true leadership. That was like burned into my brain.
Yeah, I love that. That's huge. And I think that really does. That boils down to everything that we talked about today, like humility. If you're humble enough and you don't let your ego get in the way, you want your team to succeed, that's going to come out in your leadership. Cool. And that's crucial. And that's probably a good place to wrap it up. I know we're approaching the hour, but let me take a step back. Is there any advice for anyone either like starting their career or like, let's say there's a passion that they want to pursue but are kind of scared to? Is there any advice that you would give them to maybe take action and execute on that that desire. Or like an example, I had my fiance come on the podcast, and she told the story where she went to college and she hated it, ended up becoming like a flight instructor now. So she went to flight school, got her private pilot, and now she's like teaching students how to fly planes. But anything like that, like she had to take a risk. She had to go off the path that was like normal, right? And going to college, those things. She took a chance. But do you have any advice for anyone who might be in a similar situation to take a chance?
Yeah, I think there's two emotions. There's two emotions that we operate on as humans most of the time. And it's the easiest emotions that we have to deal with, right? And you probably know what they are. But those emotions are anger and fear, because they're easy to understand. Yeah. They're relatable. Everybody knows them. And it's the easiest things that we lean towards. And the thing that stops us most of the time from doing the things that we want to do, it's fear, right? It's fear of the unknown. The unknown is the most stressful thing you could possibly deal with, is the unknown. And my advice to anyone that's saying, hey, I want to start this thing, or I'd like to go this way, or I'm afraid to do this, or I'm afraid of the results, whatever it is, I would say, attack your fears. Anything that you're afraid of, anything that's holding you back, anything that you feel like it's going to be a challenge, or it's hard, or it's scary, attack your fear. That's why it ended up part of my career path, and part of the things that I did, and the groups that I ended up working with. If I'm being totally honest with you, it was all because of fear. I'll give you some small examples. I wouldn't say that I'm afraid of heights. I'm not a fan, right?
Yeah, like
I can be afraid of heights in the right situation. But I was kind of afraid of heights, if I'm being totally honest. So I joined the technical rope team, because what do they do on the technical rope team? Hey, get your butt over this 7-story building and hang off this building on a rope.
Yeah,
I was like, I have to attack that fear, right? I kind of had this fear of, this is kind of a weird one, but I have this weird, I don't know that I'd call it a phobia, but a little bit of a weird fear of like being buried alive, or being like in small spaces, right? So I joined the trench rescue team, because what's one of the things we're doing on the trench rescue team? We're going down in trenches, we're going down in holes, we're shoring up things, and we're going in to get people in precarious positions. I kind of had a fear of public speaking. You can kind of see that that's what I'm doing now. But back in the day, when I had a fear of public speaking, when I was still in the field, I started teaching. So I taught at colleges, adjunct faculty at the colleges. I started teaching EMT and paramedic classes, advanced cardiology and advanced pediatrics and stuff like that. And it was just something that I was like, this scares me, I have to attack it. And in every situation that I have identified a fear, I have identified the worst case scenario of what could happen if I do this and I fail, and then I've gone and attacked it, I've never regretted it. So I would just say, identify your fear, identify what you think's holding you back, identify the path that you think that your heart you want to take is, and whatever you identify you think's holding you back, attack it full force. Because the worst case is you end up back where you started. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, there's nothing's wrong. I love that, because I'm not sure if you know who Tim Ferriss is, but he's like a business guy. He's got a very large podcast, but on his podcast, he talked about something called fear setting. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's basically the opposite of goal setting. It's like you set a goal, and then you work backwards to identify what are the worst case scenarios. And he talked about, like, he wanted to write a book, and he didn't have I think this is the example. He's like, I didn't have a lot of money. Worst case scenario is I'm in the same situation after I finish, but I have a book. It's like, okay, that's cool. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's crucial. And so I agree, because this podcast is a good example of that. Like, I was terrified to start ever since I heard Tim Ferriss is the guy that got me into podcasts, but I ate up Jocko's podcast. I'm a big fan of podcasts. Like, anytime I'm not talking to someone or doing anything, I'm usually listening to that, because it's like the easiest way for me to learn. And so I always wanted to do it, and I was just terrified. And the first episode I recorded, it was really, really bad. You can go listen to it and be like, I don't know if I should have been on this guy's podcast. But it was like 15 minutes of me just being like, hey, I kind of want to try it. But there was like I sat down when it was all finished, and there was like a 30-minute period where all I had to do was press upload, and I just couldn't do it. And then I finally just said, you know what? I got to do it. I have to do this. It's already done. If someone says it's bad, great. I can handle that. and just went for it. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think overcoming fears and managing anger and emotions are two really important things when you're self-reflecting and figuring out what you want out of life and what interests you. So I appreciate you going into that.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
And I appreciate you coming on this podcast. Seriously, it's been awesome. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I think you've provided some really crucial insights for our listeners. So it means a lot that you came and took some time to speak to us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity. I was excited to do it, and Jack called me. He's like, "Hey, you want to do a podcast?" I was like, "Yeah, let's do it, man. Lock and load. I'm all about it."
Well, right on.
I got some downtime this week between clients, so I'm all about it. I did a little motor. So I look like a lobster today because I did a motorcycle ride yesterday for a memorial ride with some of my SWAT buddies. So
yeah, there we go. That's
if
good.
I look too red on your videos, that's why. But I had to get out and clear my mind and have some peace, and see some of God's creation in the mountains and enjoy that. So if you have to edit the video, I apologize.
Hey, no worries at all. I'm a very pale man too, so hey, I got my own complexion problems. But
dude, I'm to a crisp right now. So
well, aloe vera and what else they say? I don't know. Salts, soak. I don't know. That's what my grandma used to tell me. But yeah, seriously, if you ever want to be on this podcast, or if you're ever in the area, we can get together and we'll get some lunch. But we'll keep following you. Where can the listeners follow you and the team and everyone else and get some more insights?
Yeah, so you could follow Echelon Front, just at Echelon Front on pretty much all platforms. You can follow me at Danny Ziem. That's just DANNYZIEM 343 on Instagram. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you guys have questions, or you can shoot DMs or whatever. And yeah, I'd love to come on the podcast again. We could do a follow up in the future.
Right on. Well, appreciate your time.
I'll put in a word for you with Rob Jones.
Yeah,
I'll talk to Rob and tell him that we got a friendly competition going on. He doesn't do it, I'm winning.
Oh, there we go. I'm running my first marathon this Saturday actually, and Rob was a big influence in that. Because every time he's unreal. But every time like I would struggle and I'd find myself complaining on a run, and I was like, if he can do it without legs, I can keep going. When
we do muster team PT, he was been at the last couple, and he'll be over there doing burpees or doing stuff, and I'm like, okay, suck it up, Danny. Rob Jones, you're making you look stupid. So he's a great dude. Don't tell him I said that, but he's a great dude.
Right on. I'll edit that part out. But seriously, Danny, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, man. Stay in touch.
Okay, sounds good. And everyone else, just keep getting after it.